Of the many unique selling points of Formula E at launch, a major one was to encourage motor companies that previously abstained from racing to take part. They were successful in this, as many teams including Mahindra, an Indian company whose team would be based out of the UK, ended up as one of the founding teams. What was even cooler was the fact that Mahindra weren't there just to make up numbers. They were serious about making a name for themselves. While this held true for the first few years, they've been in a bit of a downward spiral since the 2019-2020 season, to the point where it feels like they've completely dropped the ball in the ongoing season. So what went so wrong for a team that showed so much potential? Well, to answer this question, we need to understand the unique history of this team in the sport. During the initial years, Mahindra were popular for all the right reasons. They finished in the points in the first ever Formula E race when Karun Chandhok took 5th in Beijing, and they went on to finish 8th in the championship that year. During the second season, they went a step further by making their own powertrain, the M2 Electro, which in itself was no small task. However, they took things to an entirely new level by getting on the podium at the very first race of that season and finished 5th in the championship at the end of it. Such progress in just 2 years would make anyone proud, but the best was yet to come. The third season of Formula E ended up being the best season for Mahindra to date. They would taste victory for the very first time, and their driver Felix Rosenqvist would even be involved in the title fight. They would finish the season 3rd in the championship, and they went from being the underdogs who could punch above their weight to serious contenders. However, this would be the last time Mahindra would enthrall instead of disappoint. What followed was the beginning of the downward slide. During the 2017-18 season, they started the season strong with 2 wins and a podium, but things just unravelled from the 4th race, and even though they finished the season in 4th, it was quite clear that cracks had begun to appear. Their strategy calls weren't on point, and the leadership lacked that competitive edge. The 2018-19 season drove this point home when they finished 6th in the championship. They followed this up with 9th for the next 2 seasons. A slight improvement to 8th last year wasn't anything to brag about, and things are even worse this season as they're currently the 2nd worst team in Formula E. They might as well be last, as the only team behind them also happens to be the only other team that is powered by the current gen Mahindra M9 Electro powertrain. To put it simply, Mahindra has gone from being a title contender to a back marker in just 7 years. So how could that happen? As is usually the case with racing, it hasn't been one big issue that's been sinking the Mahindra ship, but a combination of multiple factors. While no team is perfect, Mahindra has been suffering from more problems than the others. 3 of these problems are systemic: instability, low talent retention, and a general ineptitude when it comes to car development. Now let's start with the first and one of the most fundamental reasons behind Mahindra's slump. If you were to analyse this team's history, the one thing that has stood out consistently is, ironically, a lack of consistency. The world of motorsport is dynamic and ever-changing, but top teams tend to stick with a core set of personnel, including drivers. With Mahindra, drivers leaving mid-season, as was the case with Pascal Wehrlein or Oliver Rowland this year, and other key team personnel leaving out of the blue for no explicable reason has been far too common. What this does is destabilise the entire setup. While the rest of the field prepares to put their best foot forward prior to the start of every season, Mahindra are often left scrambling to just get all the moving parts of the team to just work. By the time they do that, the rest of the field is already ahead, and Mahindra, by virtue of standing still, are moving backwards. To put it simply, the team has undergone too many rebuilding phases under different drivers and personnel. So much so that breaking into the front of the field has been totally out of the question for some time now. Any possibility of a redemption in 2023 were thrown out of the window when it was revealed last year that the only stable figurehead in Mahindra hierarchy, team boss Dilbagh Gill, would be stepping down. To make matters worse, Gill has been replaced by Frédéric Bertrand. There's nothing really wrong with his management style, but he's come with unnecessary baggage. He formerly held a director position at the FIA, and many feel that isn't right, that someone who was in a managerial position in the very body that regulates the sport should now be at the helm of one of the racing teams. This unnecessary negative press has put the team in focus for all the wrong reasons, which is the last thing they need in what is yet another rebuilding phase. As an extension to this, the way this team has managed its drivers hasn't been great either. In the sport's short history, they've gone through 11 different drivers. Most of their driver changes have been sudden, inexplicable, and often in the middle of a season. In any motorsport, the drivers play a big role by providing proper feedback and shaping the direction of the development of the car. With the drivers playing musical chairs at Mahindra, there can be no cohesive direction when it comes to developing the car and the powertrain. This in turn means that any progress is difficult to sustain, and getting new drivers accustomed in your car takes longer. There can be many reasons for this. Drivers often use Formula E as a stepping stone to enter other racing categories. Nick de Vries jumping ship to join Formula 1 this year is a great example. This isn't a problem specific to Mahindra, but where they fall behind the other teams is how unattractive they are to the top talent. With a reputation for not being the best team when it comes to how the drivers are treated, Mahindra never is the first choice for the best drivers, and without these drivers, stopping their downward slide, let alone recovering from it, is next to impossible. Finally, there is the car. All teams can make mistakes, and many of them do when designing and developing their cars. What separates the great teams from the good ones is the ability to make fewer mistakes and to learn from each misstep. Mahindra is a team that often lumbers around like a sleepy toddler searching for its pacifier in the dark. The Cape Town E-Prix saw one of the most embarrassing moments in the history of all motorsports, when Mahindra had to withdraw every single one of their cars due to safety concerns over their rear suspension. The level of incompetency needed to make such a huge blunder after being in the sport from the very beginning is unforgivable. Screwing up something really complicated like a delicate aerodynamic surface or some complicated bit of the powertrain is still understandable. But to mess up something so fundamental, and that too 5 races into the season, is just laughable. Mahindra often start a season well, but fail to keep the momentum going. They always seem to run into a wall after the first couple of races because of performance issues, poor strategy calls, driver changes, and a general sense of complacency. All these factors combined with other problems such as a field that is becoming increasingly competitive, rumoured problems with funding, lack of a clear authority figure, and a generally chaotic management structure means that it's a miracle the team has scored any points this season. Their trouble also shows no signs of relenting. Bertrand has been all promise no result so far. Oliver Rowland has already left the team mid-season, and there are rumours that Lucas de Grassi may not stick around either. All this leads to the natural line of questioning: will Mahindra ever be able to turn things around? Will the team survive yet another attempt at being rebuilt, or is this the final throes of a slow and painful demise? I don't have a crystal ball to accurately predict what the future holds for this once promising team, but history has taught us that whenever an organisation finds itself in such a precarious position, they either use it as the necessary motivation to not just return to their former glory, but to scale new heights, or they just wither away. Sadly, the former doesn't happen too often. The likelier outcome is for them to call it quits. Mahindra Racing is at such a crossroads. They don't have an infinite pool of resources, and sooner than later, they'll be written off as an unfruitful venture if their current form continues. Their only glimmer of hope is for Bertrand to convince Grassi to stay and to motivate the team to do whatever they did during the 2016-17 season. With just a handful of races to go this year, there's very little the team can do beyond finishing the points a few times to save face. The real challenge will be to turn up next year with renewed vigour. They really need to hire the right people, put the right people in the right leadership positions, and above all, learn from all the many mistakes they've been committing since 2018. If they can't do that, next year this time, we might be talking about how yet another promising upstart in motorsport threw it all away when they could have had it all.